show up on the screen that's showing this recording.
You're on.
So, you may have noticed, or may not have, depending on how observant a therapist you are, that there is a video camera in the middle of the room.
It's not a little alien.
And you may ask yourself, why is there a video camera being turned on in the middle of the room right now? And that's because I'm going to be going up for training to be certified as an integrative a certified international integrative psychotherapist, trainer, and supervisor. CIIPTS. They'll work on that. Gregor, work on that. And because I'm doing that, there are a couple people who are going to write me a recommendation letter. And one of them is Gregor, who's in Slovenia as we speak. Probably also myself speaking. I hope. And he, it's fine, Abby. You can open the clip bar. You're going to start coming with pretty open clip bars. It's totally fine.
Hey, some days are good days.
But I really appreciate your thoughtfulness, just being so careful. I think it makes it worse, however. It's like a Band-Aid, just go for it, you know? And so anyway, to write the recommendation letter, Gregor wants to see a little bit of me in action, so that's why I'm going to record this session, or this talk, this training. I don't know what it is, Gregor. Whatever the hell it is. This is what I'm doing. So, what I want to do today is I actually want to talk about theory of methods. I want to talk about how integrative psychotherapy works from how we work with clients standpoint. And the way I'm going to do that today is different than how I've done it historically. I'm going to go ahead and do a bit of a session with myself. And we'll see how that goes. I'm not sure how good a client I'll be. I'm sure I'll be fine. See how good a client and therapist I am as I try to work with myself here. But I'm going to do a little bit of work with myself. And I'm going to enact, it's going to be a one-man play, so to speak. And I'm going to enact both roles. I probably won't physically move from role to role, but I think it'll be evident as to who I am at what time. What I want to do, and I'm going to try to stop and teach as I work with myself as well. I tried this twice at home to see if it works. And at least speaking out loud by myself, it works. So we'll see whether in front of a live studio audience it works for me. Not that you're a live studio audience. So we'll see.
Do we have a couple of signs?
Please hold the signs up for us, please. Interestingly, when I did this, I did different pieces of work with myself. And I just tried to be most immediate with what was on. So I'm going to sit in the room with myself as a client, and I'm just going to start to have a dialogue with myself. And as I go through the conversation, I'm going to talk and try to teach about what I'm doing and how that applies to the theory of methods in integrative psychotherapy. Please stop me. Please be involved. Please tell me, where you may need help in clarifying where things are, how things are feeling for you as they come up. So I'd start by just asking myself, how am I doing today? How am I feeling? I usually start the therapy session with an inquiry. The first part of the theory of methods is to inquire. And the first layer of inquiry is phenomenological. And that is to inquire, is to try to get the client to start to be in touch with their internal world. Very often, clients will come in and talk to us about how they're doing functionally, what's happening around them. All these things are wonderful. There's no critique of a client coming in telling us about their life. Sometimes we're the only person that they get to talk to about their lives. We want to be there to hear their stories, to listen, to be a safe place for them. But over time, we want to know more. We want to know more than simply what's happening functionally. We also want to know what's happening internally. We want to learn about their internal landscape. And so the inquiry might be, you know, it might be, how are you feeling about that, if they've been talking about something. Or it may just lead in with, how are you? Well, I'm a little bit anxious right now. Oh. Tell me more about that. And well, tell me more isn't a question per se. Okay, it's very much an invitation for the client to continue that phenomenological exploration of themselves. Well, I've got this video camera on here, and I'm being recorded, and I can feel physiologically being a little bit more tense knowing I'm being recorded than I'd feel if I weren't. How come? What is it about that? What's happening for you? This is making you a bit more tense. Now, I could go to, well, wouldn't anybody feel more tense if they were being recorded? To which the therapist would respond. The therapist might respond. Well, many people might. But what I'm wondering about is, why are you feeling tense? What's happening with you that you're feeling this way? Well, it feels to me like I'm being watched. I have this feeling that maybe I'm being evaluated. Maybe at some level I'm being assessed. That my performance is going to be reviewed in some way. And it's at some level this isn't going to just be safe. That somebody's watching me in some regard. Now the movement suddenly, as the therapist, might shift to the second level of inquiry, okay, which is a transferential inquiry. So we've inquired phenomenologically into the feeling. Now, the fact that we'll say little Carl, okay, is feeling watched in all this, okay, well, it's information, and it's certainly interesting. Okay? It wouldn't have to feel that way. It seems Carl knows Gregor. It seems they like each other. It would appear from the earlier dialogue that we get along quite well. Okay? And yet, at some level, I'm feeling watched. And so, my first hunch as a therapist is that there's something transferential going on. Okay? That experience seems a little bit inconsistent with the reality of what I seem to have a sense of. Okay? And so I'm wondering where this feeling of being watched comes from, or where this feeling of being observed comes from. So the inquiry could go in different ways. Okay? Is that a feeling you've had for a long time? Or it might be more one of, is that an old feeling for you? We could inquire, historically, and look into how old is that feeling for you. Okay? Or we could take a slightly different approach. But let's just go with that. Okay? We could go with, well, is that a feeling you have oftentimes? Or is that something that happens to you a lot? Or how old is that feeling? Okay? But I'll say, is that something that happens for you? Does that happen to you a lot? Or is that an experience you have with some frequency? Well, when I'm around other people that I don't know that well, I become more anxious. And then I can feel as if somehow I'm being observed around my performance. Right? How am I doing? Having done some of my own work, I can become aware of how sometimes I can take on the responsibility in the relationship to have to be the one that has to get it right for everyone. And I feel like it's up to me to make this relationship better. Now, your client may not disclose all that much that quickly. Okay? Having been in therapy for a long time, I can speak in that. Having been a therapist as well, I can speak in that language. I can say that. There may be a lot more work to get And now the idea that being in a new relationship with somebody you don't know may create anxiety for somebody, right? That isn't necessarily archaic. That's not an uncommon human experience. It may or may not be that way, but that's fairly common for us. That can be an adult anxiety, all right? But the fact that then I can move toward feeling I have to take care of everyone, feeling it's my responsibility to get it right, feeling it's up to me to repair that, right? that may be something that's a little bit older. And so then, you know, I could inquire at that point. See, how far back does that go? That sense of having to get it right, that sense of they're watching you, they're checking your performance. Well, that's very old for me. It goes back about as far back as I can remember. So now I'm thinking this ties somehow to family of origin. I'm thinking this ties to early relationships. Like first time, typically, usually with mom or dad. But tell me more about that. Early on in your life, who was it who was watching? Well, that'd be my mom. You know, my mom was very anxious, and it was really important to her that I be a good boy, that I operate in a way that was comfortable for her. She was constantly observing me. She was consistently looking at me. She was wanting me to perform well. And she was consistently giving me feedback around whether I was doing a good job or not, in terms of, you know, how I was doing. So it became very important for me to get it right for my mom. And then the inquiry can, you know, so there's lots of different ways to go here. We can go back to a phenomenological inquiry. What was that like for you? How did that feel for you? And now I'm trying to take movement toward the vulnerability. I want to know that hidden vulnerability around what that boy felt that he probably couldn't share with a mother who was consistently watching him. What was that like for you? Well, you know, that was lonely. It was scary. It felt sad to be left alone. So now I'm going to switch into another way of inquiry. I want to inquire into the coping style, which in some ways has already been told to me. How did you survive that? How did you get through that sense of feeling left alone, that sense of being sad? How did you deal with that? Well, you know, I think I did two things. One is I tried really hard to try to get it right enough for Mom, out of the hope that one day I'd do it well enough that she wouldn't be anxious anymore. And then I could relax, and things would finally be okay. I'd finally get it right enough, she'd finally not be anxious anymore. And I might say, well, I certainly can see how much you cared for your body. And I see how hard you worked out of the hope that in some way you'd be able to make this okay. And I'm just trying to normalize that coping style, have empathy for how hard that was, and keep moving towards some of that vulnerability by really staying tuned in to that little guy. Now, lots of different ways to go. Okay? There always are. As a therapist, there's no one right path. There's always a choice moment. You said there were a couple of coping styles. I could move to ask about the next one. I could stay with the feeling right now and not want to miss that and stay in the vulnerability and not worry about the second one, knowing that it'll come back at a later time. Is there a right choice to make? No. And that's the thing about therapy. There's no right path. There's no right, this is the right answer. There's just, well, we're always making that choice. Where do we go? Right? We're just trying, and as we have more experience with ourselves as therapists, we just trust our felt sense of what's next. And you know, my inclination, sensing the vulnerability in the moment, is to go more and more toward leaning into that vulnerability, to inquire about that vulnerability, to want to pull that feeling out, because what we have is we have the opportunity now to really work with that child ego state. We have we see there is inside this person with this unfinished business that comes up when it's just this camera just sits there. That's all it does. It gets flipped open and a button gets pressed. Right? And one person that he knows that he likes is going to watch this. And that's really all that's happening. But all of a sudden, from an adult ego state standpoint, from the adult self, you know, to hold on to that and to have that sense that it's okay, and to just be able to continue having a trust and faith in the world, okay, would be certainly one option for a healthy adult ego state. But and it certainly would be understandable for an adult to have some anxiety as well about perhaps being evaluated. But there's some old stuff that's gotten brought up as well in this. There's this old child part that once again is being watched. His mother's eye is right there on that camera lens. Right? It's watching him right now. It's wondering in looking at him, are you doing it right? And so, you know, we can come back to that, right? And you know, and start to try to touch into that vulnerability. So I'm just going to, I don't know quite where I was in the actual therapeutic process, having talked about it at the same time. I'm just going to kind of go back and just find out right from here. Which, by the way, happens in therapy as well, right? Where exactly were we? Well, we just find our place from here. Okay? You know, so I could come back to, you know, if let's say I'd gone away lost in thought for a moment. Where'd you go? Where are you? You know, I was just thinking about this one time when I went and my mom was a substitute teacher sometimes in the school the elementary school I was in. And I was remembering a day when she came to that school, and she got me a popsicle, and you know, and she brought it to me, and there were some other friends at the table. And, you know, popsicle sticks in the day, you would have 2 sticks in them, right? And you could crack them in half on the table, and you could share them, right? So you know, the assumption was that since it was a popsicle, you know, so everybody in the room was like, oh, we share it with you, you share it with me, and they're all very eagerly raising their hand, wanting to, you know, share this popsicle stick with me. And we opened it up, and it turned out it was a single stick, not a multiple stick. And Philip, who was a tall friend of mine sitting next to me, said, well, if you give me this popsicle stick, I'll be your best friend forever. So it was a pretty good sell. And, you know, I wasn't that attached to the popsicle stick myself. So, you know, I said, yeah, sure, you can have it. I gave it to him. And he liked it. And for that day, he was definitely my best friend. I can't say it lasted much beyond the day, but he at least followed through for a few hours, so I promise. But when I got home that night, my mom talked to me about how I needed to do a better job taking care of myself. That I shouldn't be giving away my popsicle sticks. That was something that was for me. Saying I needed to do that differently. And there hadn't been any inquiry on my mother's part into what my experience was. Right? It was very much her telling me what I'd done wrong. And so there I was, just being watched. There it was, somebody watching me, and then I'm getting an assessment on my performance, and I got an F. And I let my mom down. And now she was going to be anxious again, and I failed. And then we can move into that vulnerability. I see how hard you tried over and over again to make that right for her. I hear how disappointing that must have been for you. For her to just come at you, for her to share with you that statement of, you did it wrong. Without her coming to know you or understand you. What are you feeling right now? Well, I'm in touch with just my own sadness for how hard that was for me. Now, in this whole process, so this is all in part the inquiry process. Okay? And what we're doing is we're really trying to help our client get in touch with the parts of themselves that get activated when they're anxious, that undo their ability to be safe, because when they're anxious, they move back into an old coping style that isn't consistent with their ability to maintain an adult sense of safety in the room or in the world. And so we inquire phenomenologically to invite that client to be in touch with whatever they're feeling in a moment. We inquire transferentially to start to understand how old this might be. Because what so often happens is what Freud called the transference of everyday life. That our experiences in our childhood transfer into our everyday lives, and our world is seen as if we were back with Mom. Do you want that blind down a little bit?
It's nice and
Okay. All right. We inquire phenomenology, we inquire into the coping style, because we want to understand how we cope with what we had to face early on. And we inquire into the vulnerability, because what we most want at the end of all that is for the client to be able to touch the part of themselves that they couldn't feel back then. That little Carl couldn't feel the sadness of how alone he felt at the idea that he was being watched, not being loved. How the world went from being the safe world in which he was loved for who he was, into an unsafe world in which he was watched and critiqued for whether he acted in the way that Mom had hoped he would or wouldn't. What a tremendous loss of safety that is. So we're always fighting to pull that part out. Now we're going to work more with that part of Carl in just a minute. Okay? But we're always inquiring to invite, to get that part, because that's the part that's hidden. Okay? It's activated, okay? But it's activated in a way that we don't recognize it in most of our transactions. We don't know where it's coming from. Okay? And so we want to understand and find that piece and touch that vulnerability and pull that to the surface, so that we can help that person work through it in the safety of the space. So they don't have to carry that and just have it activated all by kind of spontaneously outside of that space, again and again and again, and get relived. Okay? And why is it getting relived again and again? Because there's always, transference is the most remarkable thing. It is the reliving of the experience with the hope that maybe this time it will be different. Maybe this time I'll get it right enough. Maybe I'll do this talk so well that Gregor will give me a gold star, and I won't even have to go to the evaluation. He'll just write such a strong review letter, and then he'll just give it to me. I'll just get it in the mail in a month from now.
I'll go sightseeing.
You can all go sightseeing that day instead. That's right. It's this wonderful hope that transference has with it. I'm going to recreate this experience, and it's going to, maybe it can be different this time. And it's also very familiar, and it's the repeated experience. So it's familiar, it's known. it anchors into my own sense of identity that happened early on. I know my role, it's stabilizing. Okay? It's script. Okay? And so we hold on to script, right? For a number of reasons, right? We know who we are in this relationship. We're the one trying to get it right. I know that role. Okay? It's stable, it's consistent, it's the world's predictable. Everybody wants me to get it right for them. I know what to do in this world. I know what to expect. As much as it's the hell I know it. And I'll take that predictability. Okay? And you know, and there's a certain safety net. You know, gosh, if you just love me the way I was, gosh, maybe I'll do it wrong and you won't anymore. So maybe that's not very safe. So we're really trying to understand what that person's script is and have them sit in that script in a really felt way by inquiring. But inquiry alone wouldn't quite do it. Right? We need attunement to go with inquiry. All along the way, we need to be attuning to that client's response so that we're continually creating that safety that allows them to continue that experience. Okay? We're tuning in to affect. Right? If the client is expressing a level of sadness, we're trying to respond with compassion. Okay? If a client is responding with a level of anxiety, okay, we're offering a certain sense of reassurance. We're not jumping in using reassurance to rescue. Oh, don't worry, the camera's not a big deal, you're fine, it's okay, you're safe. Because that's really not genuinely reassuring. That's not reassurance. It's two things. That's not really reassuring for that client. It's actually dismissive of where they are. And it's often an attempt for just us to reassure ourselves more than it is to reassure them. Okay? To reassure somebody is to reassure them that I understand. There's a reassurance in, I'm here with you in what you're going through. Okay? That's the reassurance. Not the reassurance of, oh, it's okay, it's not a big deal. It's, I'll get through this with you. We'll get through this together. That's the reassurance that boy needed and he didn't have. We're trying to tune in, okay, to the affect of what's being expressed. Okay? We're tuning to the relational needs. There's a tremendous need for security that this child has. And that gets met by the therapist's unconditional positive regard. To use Roger's term. That we really want that person to feel that they're okay, just the way they are. That who they are in this moment is enough. The need for validation, to validate what the client's experience was. So we're working along the way to attune to relational needs as well. There you gotta go. Yeah. You bet. Thanks for being here. We're attuning to rhythm. As people start to process more affectively, as they move away from cognitive processing more into feeling, their processing slows down. When people start to do more affective processing, then they start to say, we need to slow down with them. They need somebody who can slow down and attune to their rhythm, to their pace, to stay with them. In a funny way of saying it, to in some ways get out of the sped up rhythm of their cognition and into the slower rhythm of their affect, or their feeling, and the more natural rhythm. And then we're also trying to attune to developmental level. We're trying to guess, how old is that Carlin in that story? Where is he developmentally? And how do I attune to that child? You know, there's a lovely statement that Richard Erskine says, which is, you know, I'm always a play therapist. I just sometimes do it with adults. Okay? Or I'm always a child therapist, right? That capacity to recognize that as we get back to some of our more archaic stuff, we're pulling out from us a younger part of ourselves, and to developmentally start to watch the physiology of our client and where they are, and the affect of the language and how they're speaking, and what that's communicating, so we can start to attune developmentally to our client, which is why developmental theory is important in integrative psychotherapy, and we can understand where someone might be developmentally. And then the last part is to be involved, and we'll come back to that piece. So we have inquiry, attunement, and involvement. Okay, so we have all these tools at our available to us. Now, I want to go back to the therapy with Carl for a minute. Okay, so by the way, am I pacing this? I'm just going on. Am I pacing this in a way that's trackable? You guys are following? Okay.
Mhm.
I just need one little bit of clarification.
Absolutely.
So the 3 steps of the method
Yeah.
would be the inquiry, attunement, and involvement, and
Correct.
that's your outline.
That's the outline. That's the
Okay.
fundamental framework from which integrative psychotherapy operates.
Okay.
Okay. Richard he has a little diagram where he draws it. He calls it the keyhole. Okay. Because in some ways that's the key. Get the key in there. You open it. Use that to open the door into the client.
Okay.
And what follows then is now we're here, right? Now we're in this place with little Carl, and we're in this place where he's shown up in the room. He's there. He's in touch with being watched. He's in touch with. Now we have some options here, okay? And you know. We want to do the best we can to pace our session based on our felt sense of where the client is, what they're ready for, how much work they can do. We don't want to create a juxtaposition by asking them to do too much too fast. And as I said before, script is important. It's maintaining their stability. Okay? What we're doing right now is offering the idea of working through old life scripts in a way that really liberates people. So we really want to pace things as best we can. Okay? So we can go a couple different ways. We can inquire at this point about how Carl's feeling. You know, I feel good. I feel better. Having just been able to say all this, to just talk about it, just bring it up. I feel a sense of relief. The camera's not as scary anymore. Gregor isn't as scary. I don't feel as unsafe in the world. I feel like I got to talk about who I was and what was happening for me. And I feel like there was some compassion for that part of me that didn't get seen, and I feel better, and we can, and that can be enough. Or or we can go. Now that isn't the only possible outcome of getting into that felt sense, but you know, that can be one piece of work right there. Okay? It doesn't mean we're done or Carl's done. This is an ongoing process. But we also have the opportunity here, depending on time, right? We usually have an hour for our sessions, you know, unless we're doing some kind of workshop where we have much more time, we can work with somebody more in depth, perhaps. You know, depending on time, depending on what we feel the client is ready for, our felt sense of where the client is, we can do a regressive therapy and work with that child ego state. We can deepen the work. We can continue on. Okay? Because getting there and acknowledging and attuning to is very significant and can be enough. But there can also be more if we want there to be. But I want to talk about and show you a little bit of what that more can look like. But I need to stop talking to drink water. And I want to stop to just check in with all of you and see where you are in this process, and see what we have time for in here, in terms of whether we want to talk more about regress, because there's 2 pieces we can talk about. that I could talk for the next 50 minutes and fill out this whole time talking about. We could look at some of the regressive work and do some of the regressive therapy with that child ego state. And then the other part of it is okay, we can also do work with the parent ego state. The fact that Carl can see mom in that camera lens is typically a statement of there's a mom in Carl's head that's already doing that work that he can sometimes project into that lens. And we can work with that internalized mother as well. We can work with a parent ego state. Okay? Now, they all fundamentally have the same core components to them. They all involve inquiry, attunement, involvement. No matter what we're doing, that's the baseline of how. Okay? It just isn't always the context of what. Okay? Some of the what which we did today was just the work of getting into that contactful place. Okay? And validating and allowing that feeling out. But then we can work in that contactful place from a regressive therapy standpoint. We can equally well work with the adult ego state as well and start to so in the language of TA, we deconfuse the child, okay? We're decontaminating the adult, and we're de-something the parent. We're decommissioning the parent ego state. Okay? So we can do some of all that work. And then we can work on strengthening the adult ego state as well. So I can talk about all those things, but I'll talk the entire time. And I want to stop and make sure that you get to talk. And I want to know how you all are. And then I can drink and we can come back. Keep going. And this, unfortunately, is not your home brewed wine or your home brewed beer. I'm afraid I'm stuck with tap available water. How are you guys in this? Where are you all at? What's your experience? And just so you know, I'll edit this part off of the video part. I'll just send the parts where I'm talking. So don't feel that you're on camera.
I think for me it's kind of validating to hear like the structure, and I could like review like how I am in session and be like, oh, I guess I'm doing that without knowing that there's, you know, the structure of the integrative psychotherapy to it. So I guess validating and also helpful in knowing that structure, so when I do get lost or off track or need to return to something, I could say, okay, where was I and where do I want to go, and it's kind of like a roadmap, as opposed to winging it.
Sure. Yeah, I think that I think it's well said, Jeff. I think that good therapy is winging it with a roadmap.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really do. Yeah. You know, I have definitively had thoughts about what, you know, oh, in this session, this would be a good session too. And the client comes in and it's something altogether different, and that's where we're going because that's what needs to happen, and off we go.
That's what piano lessons are like.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's what life is like. Winging it with a roadmap. Football games are like
Our new offensive coordinator, he has a cool system, but he folds a piece of paper into like, there are 8 little sections. And like literally he wings it. And like he'll flip his paper over, okay, we're doing this. And you can see him kind of on the sideline, nope, that didn't work. And then he switches to a different part of his paper. Okay, we're doing this.
Absolutely.
But it's mostly me.
Your favorite roadmap.
Yeah.
I feel like you hooked me right away with this and the kind of need to make the relationship work. Like you being the one to make things all right.
Right.
And so I think about myself both personally and professionally, and then I start thinking about all of us in this room, kind of personally and professionally, and are we all here because that's the feeling that we have for some reason, is to make things right, you know? And then I started thinking about kind of where that might come from for me. And I don't remember feeling like my parents were looking at me to perform in a certain way. I mean, they were just a couple of pot smoking hippies, that really didn't, I don't ever feel like they did anything but just love me. But I had an older brother and a younger sister that a lot of conflict between the two of them.